Joining me now is House Intelligence Chair Adam Schiff. Congressman, you've asked for an explanation from Homeland Security about these crackdowns on protesters, and now we know that the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz from DOJ, is investigating both there and at Lafayette Square across from the White House. What is going on here, and do you think it's necessary for these troops to be, these federal agents to be deployed as aggressively as they are?
No, I don't at all, and I don't think it's appropriate. And what's more, the people in the region don't want the presence of these federal troops, these largely unmarked federal troops. They think it's only going to make it worse, that it's going to be incendiary. And, you know, we've seen evidence that people are being grabbed off the street, hustled into unmarked vehicles by people who are not well identified, if they're identified at all. And this includes people just peacefully protesting. This is the kind of thing that you see in repressive regimes around the world, not in the United States. But it's clear why it's being done. It's being done against the wishes of these local officials by the President of the United States because he feels it's a good campaign issue for him to run on. He is more than willing to create chaos so that he can say that he's the law and order president. Once again, I think that is looking out for his interests, and it is not looking out for the national interest in any way, shape, or form.
Now, the local officials in Portland say it got a lot worse. There were a couple of hundred protesters, and then when these camouflage-wearing forces arrived, it was very hard to figure out who they were, that they were using excessive force. But what the White House is saying is that there have been protests in Portland now for weeks and weeks. And in fact, in Chicago, which they were also threatening to send forces to against the mayor's wishes there were all of these shootings and deaths the other day. So is there a legitimate need for more federal action to bolster the local officials?
Well, look, there are certainly places in the country that could use additional help when those local officials want it, and provided that that help is directed in ways that are useful. If that is directed, for example, against gun running operations or straw purchasers or any number of other traditional purposes for which local law enforcement works with federal law enforcement. But that's not what's going on here, and that's not the president's objective. The objective here is to have a campaign issue, and if it inflames tensions to send troops where they're not wanted, the president is more than willing to do it. And by troops, I'm talking about these fatigue-wearing, I don't know, DHS security personnel or people from the Border Patrol. I mean, what are they doing in Portland? The fact that you have to go to such extraordinary lengths to justify under this provision or that why these border agents can be used shows you what an abuse of the agency it is. So it's not only going to inflame matters, but it also is undermining these agencies, because ultimately the public is not going to respect what they're doing. They're not going to trust these agencies. And when they really are needed in natural disasters, when they're needed in terms of their real job responsibilities, they're not going to enjoy the confidence of the American people. I'm glad the Inspector Generals will be investigating. They really need to.
Now, the Director of National Intelligence Office issued a statement today on these briefings that have been held. I believe there have been briefings for the Hill and for the campaigns. They say, the statement saying that today we see our adversaries seeking to compromise the private communications of U.S. political campaigns, candidates, and other political targets. Our adversaries also seek to compromise our election infrastructure, and we continue to monitor malicious cyber actors trying to gain access to U.S. state and federal networks, including those responsible for managing elections. However, the diversity of election systems among the states, multiple checks and redundancies in those systems, and post-election auditing all make it extraordinarily difficult for foreign adversaries to broadly disrupt or change vote tallies without detection. I want to boil that down with you. They are talking, they say, about China, Russia, and Iran. The president talked to Putin yesterday. There's no indication from the readout that he even raised this issue. But do you have the same confidence that the DNI seems to have, that elections can be held safely, that the results, the tallies can be audited, especially because of the White House opposition to mail-in balloting and refusal to go along with the money that's been put into the House bill and also a Senate version to act on that bill, the Klobuchar-Langford bill, to have additional money for election security?
I don't have that confidence at all. And I think that our adversaries, in particular the Russians, are going to amplify the false messages that the president is putting out about, well, you can't trust absentee ballots, even though that's how the president votes. The Russians will look for any divide they can to sow chaos in the United States. And what better way than to amplify false information about how millions of Americans cast their votes? But I want to say this also, Andrea. I've been urging Bill Evanina and others in the intelligence community to level with the American people about what's going on, to bring them into the conversation so they're armed with good information about what our foreign adversaries are doing. And I have serious concerns about the statement that was just put out. Serious concerns in how it gives a false sense of equivalence between what Russia is doing, what China is doing, what Iran is doing. It is not the same. They don't have the same capacity. They don't have the same plans. They don't have the same intentions. And by, sort of generically talking about all three, it gives a sense that all three are active in the same ways they are not. And what's more, in the warnings that are given, they're so generic in some ways as to be meaningless. To say the Russians, for example, are merely trying to denigrate those that are part of an anti-Russia establishment, I think is so meaningless as to be unuseful in any way. But more than that, in what it omits that the intelligence community does know, I think it's misleading to the American people. So they're going to need to do a lot better than that if Americans are going to be armed with the information they need to protect their franchise.
I want to ask you about China because we have closed the Houston consulate, and they have responded by closing the U.S. consulate, or ordering it closed in Chengdu, as well as the accusation from Mike Pompeo slamming China's leader, President Xi, as totalitarian, basically saying the Chinese government the Chinese people have to rise up against the Communist Party. The most aggressive language we have heard yet from an administration that, as recently as March, the president was praising President Xi for his handling of the pandemic. So what do you think is going on here? Is the closure and this escalation justified? Will it backfire? Is it political?
Well, let me start with your last question. Is it political? The answer is absolutely. As John Bolton pointed out, and I've got a lot of mixed views about John Bolton, the president's foreign policy decisions are guided by one factor only: what's in it for Donald Trump. Some months ago, as you point out, he was praising President Xi, praising his transparency in his handling of the virus. Some time before that, as Bolton points out, he was begging President Xi to help his reelection campaign. Well, the president has now decided that getting into a confrontation with China is helpful to his reelection. It helps, he hopes, make concerns about the pandemic go away. It helps make memories of his praise of China just a couple months ago of their handling of the pandemic go away. That's the political goal. Now, don't mistake me. China is a bad actor. They steal our intellectual property. They engage in espionage. They're guilty of a great many malign activities, and they should be held to account. But this very dramatic and sudden escalation with China is all about politics. I think American people recognize that. I think China recognizes that. Ultimately, what does that do to our relationship in the long term? It's hard to say. But this kind of schizophrenia, hey, China, please help my presidential campaign, and then China is the evil empire. This, hey, President Xi is doing a great job. He's my good friend. He's being really transparent about the virus. And now these attacks. You get whipsawed with this administration. The only common denominator is, at any given point in time, what they think is good for his reelection prospects.
We'll have to leave it there. Chairman Schiff.